Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to give all of you my updated guide to Open Broadcaster software for 2022. So this, in a sense, is my crash course on all of the basics that you would need to know for getting started with streaming and recording videos using OBS on your computer. Whether that's going to be for Windows, Mac, or Linux, essentially it's the same software either way. So the first thing I want to point out is the auto configuration wizard. If you just want the quickest way to kind of get up and running, then you can go to the Tools menu and run the Auto Configuration Wizard. So I believe this also pops up on your first run of OBS. So this will just help you get some default settings going, and you can have it either optimized for streaming. That's if you're going to be recording to Twitch or YouTube Gaming or that kind of thing, then you may want to optimize for streaming. Otherwise, you would just do it for recording if you're more like me, and mostly you just record videos and then edit them later on before publishing to YouTube. So after choosing that, you would select your base canvas resolution. So this is going to be the resolution that this frame you see in the background here with that synthwave video is going to be set up for. So you can scale this down further, which is why this is called the base. But generally, I will have the base canvas resolution set to the resolution I actually want the video files to be in. So if you want to record 1080p, then 1920 pixels by 1080 is what you want. You can, of course, go up as high as your monitor would allow, or you can scale it down further. And then you'll just need to adjust these background sources to fit the window. Aside from that, common FPS or frames per second to record at would be 60 or 30. So if you have a weak computer, you can record in 30 FPS and it would be less demanding on your computer. But a lot of people these days would prefer 60, since if you can actually record at that frame rate, it tends to give you a little bit better looking results. So you can select from those, and then all you need to do is hit next. It will test and then give you recommended settings based on your computer. So then here would be the recommended settings that it automatically calculates for your computer. We're not going to apply that, and we'll talk about everything in more details now. Okay, the next thing I want to point out is scenes versus sources. So a scene is going to be composed of everything you see in this window, your recording window, which may just be one thing, like a video game or a web browser or your desktop, or it might be composed of multiple things like stream overlays, your webcam, and the background content, whether that's your video game or a random video clip like you see here. So when you have different scenes set up, you can switch between them. So I can click onto the scene 1, and then you can see the desktop there. Now note that when you switch between scenes, it's going to use a scene transition. So that scene transition is set up over here. You can see that fade is the default. If you want it to switch immediately, you can change that to cut. And now if we click between them, it's basically going to be instantaneous. And there's some other options you can play around with, as well as the duration if you want it to take longer for the fade to be completed. Now, as far as adding sources go, when you have your scene selected right over here under sources, you can right click in an empty space, go to add, and choose one of the options down here. So new ones have been added over the years, but some of the basics would be video capture device if you have a webcam or another camera plugged into your computer and you want to capture the video output from that. That would be a common option. An image if you just want to load in a PNG or that kind of thing. That can be really useful if you have an overlay, since the overlay may be composed of an image and text layered on top of that image. So there you have text here as well. So for instance, if I wanted to add some text to the screen, I would just choose the text source, hit OK, and we could type in the message. So I'll just call it tutorial here, select a font, and you can see it overlaying with the other sources in the background. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here. And when you have a source, you can move it around by left clicking on it and holding and then dragging it around your screen. So if you want your text, maybe your watermark or something to show in the top right, then you would just drag it to the top right. As you can see, there are also these other gizmos you can interact with. So if you want to stretch or expand it, you can pull on one edge and then make it bigger or smaller. Now by default, this scales both the height and width together. But if you want to do one at a time, you can hold shift down as you press on an edge and then stretch it in one direction. When you click on an existing source, there are different things you can edit about it. So if you look up here, you see the name of the text window, but there's also properties and filters you can add to it. You can select the font, kind of like before, but a quicker interface for choosing it. And you can select the color of the font as well. So if we wanted to make that orange, we could just do that. And here is a box for changing the text. So with display capture, if you want to switch monitors, there'll be this drop down here, and you can switch to any monitor that's plugged into your computer. One of the common visual filters you would add in, especially if you're using a webcam and you want to remove the background, would be a Chroma key. So I'm going to take an image I have on the desktop and we'll add it as a source here. So I will add an image. I'll rename it to green screen. Going to browse and select it from the desktop. Okay, let's go ahead and hit OK. And now let's click on the filters button and we can add a filter to it. So you can see this bunch here. The one we want to check is Chroma key. Luma key would be by brightness, but Chroma key is going to be by color. So when you key it out, you're removing part of the image based on its color selection, if it falls within a certain range of a color. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And you can see that green is selected by default, and all of that green screen area is basically filtered out. You can also change this to other colors, like blue or magenta, if for some reason you're trying to remove a different color from your background. And you can also customize this as well. And you'll see that there's this similarity slider. So if you lower this, it'll become more strict on what green is considered to be. Basically, the similarity is how far off from this key color are you going to try to remove. So if you increase this by a bunch, then it's going to remove more and more until if you put it all the way to 1,000, it just removes everything from the screen. So you kind of got to play with this slider and get it to a good number. But I think the 400 default is actually working really well here. The key color spill reduction will try to remove the green that kind of comes from this green screen area and remove it from these areas. So basically it'll be removing the green from the rest of the image. And you can see if I increase this slider, there's not really any more green in this roof area. And then you can also play around with the smoothness to make sure that these other areas, which are just a little bit green in the original image, don't get taken out. So I'm going to lower that smoothness down, and that makes the top bit here less filtered. So we're really only trying to remove this background screen in this case. So there's other settings you can play around with, of course, but I'll go ahead and hit OK there. Let's resize this image. I'll just bring it to, let's say, the bottom right. So that would probably be like where you'd put your webcam. Now, obviously, I'm just doing that with a static image, but it's basically the same process if you use a video capture device. So let's go ahead and disable that for now. And let's start talking about audio a little bit. So let's start talking about audio for a little bit, selecting a microphone. So you can see down here at the bottom that I have microphone audio signals coming in on both left and right channels here. So stereo audio there. And that's what you want to be seeing before you start recording or streaming. If you see these mic levels, and it's kind of being reflected when you actually talk into the microphone, then you probably have a good idea that it's working. So if you don't see that, then you're going to need to go up to the settings. So let's open up OBS and go to Preferences and go down to Audio. So here, Microphone Auxiliary Audio, this would be where you select your microphone input from your computer. So here I have the MacBook Air built-in microphone, but I am using the HyperX Quadcast, which is an external microphone. In this case, it's just plug and play with USB, and then it would pop into the list. So as far as recording desktop audio on Mac goes, it's possible. And I use a tool called Blackhole as 2-channel audio from the desktop. So in the description of this video, I'm going to be linking a separate tutorial, the same one I followed for getting that set up if you need desktop audio on Mac. Generally on Windows and Linux, if I recall, it just kind of works out of the box. So you just have to have the desktop audio set here to the system default desktop audio. So audio devices can also have filters, and one that I find is very useful is a noise suppression filter for your microphone. So to add a filter to your microphone, down here in the audio mixer, you can click down here and expand the settings menu, go to filters, and then you can add in a audio noise suppression filter. So you do that with the plus sign, and you can select one of the filters that are built into OBS. Also, VST audio plugins are also supported if you have any external tools you want to use, but noise suppression is basically all I use currently. And when you add that in, you can choose from either RN noise or speed X. Obviously, I'm using RN noise because it has good quality and I'm not too worried about the CPU usage. And what that does is it tries to remove really quiet background noises from the recorded audio, and that generally makes it easier to edit later on. Okay, next up, let's talk about some of the recording settings in more details. So first off, if you're going to be streaming, how do you take OBS and connect it to Twitch or YouTube or any other streaming service? So once again, we go back up to the OBS menu and then go to Preferences. And then here we're going to go down to the stream tab. So here on this tab, it's going to default to Twitch, but you can change that to YouTube, Facebook Live, or other streaming services, or even to use custom to put in one that doesn't appear on this list. But for the easy ones, Twitch and YouTube, you can see that they have the option to just connect the account. So when you choose this, it's just going to pop open in the web browser with the window where you just authenticate to YouTube and you say, yes, you want to connect OBS to this. And then once you see it as connected, you should be able to go back to the Twitch or YouTube back end interface and test the stream, make sure it works before you actually go live. I have other videos on that in more detail if you want to check that out. But basically, it's just a connect button, and then you just authenticate with Twitch and YouTube. No big deal. The next category we'll talk about is output settings. So in output, we have streaming and recording. So the streaming is going to be the settings for what goes out onto the internet for Twitch, YouTube, whatever you're live streaming to. This is going to be the information that they're going to be receiving. And then recording, you can have set up separately with different settings for what is going to be recorded to your computer as the local video file. And if you're going to be recording to your computer, which is not exclusive with streaming, you can do both at the same time. One thing you're going to want to keep in mind is going to be your recording format. So by default, it's MKV here. And these days, I would just use MKV since my main video editor is DaVinci Resolve, which now supports MKV. Other really popular formats would be MP4 or .mov. As you can see, as it mentions, though, if your file doesn't get finalized, you might lose the data that you were trying to record. So that's never personally happened to me. But because of that, I'll just stick to MKV since it's compatible with DaVinci Resolve. I don't really have a reason to use anything else at the moment. But when you export your final video file, you can, of course, put it in MP4 or .mov format, which may be more compatible with online upload sites. You also see here rescale output. So this generally is a setting I'm not really going to touch, but if you want to change your output to a different size from the main video window, then this is one place you can do it. The main tab to actually do that on generally is video. So the base canvas resolution when we were doing the auto configuration, that is what you see in the background here, the frame of your window. Output scaled resolution is the default that's going to be outputting to. So that would be, I believe, both your streaming and your recording output. But then this is once again another option to rescale that kind of overrides that. But generally, I will just take the base canvas resolution and use that for everything, not rescaling down the output. And here's another place you can select your FPS. You can see it's not just 30 and 60. There's other options here, but generally 30 and 60 is all I ever use when I'm recording on the computer. So that works fine for me. Okay, back in the output tab, you'll also see here the encoder, and there's one for the streaming encoder here as well. So right now I am using a Mac, and that's why I have the Apple hardware and software encoders here as an option. If you're running on a Windows, and I believe Linux machine as well, if you've got an NVIDIA card, you may see the NVIDIA NVENC encoder. So the difference between the Apple hardware encoder and the NVIDIA encoder. So the difference between this X264 encoder and the Apple hardware encoders, as well as the NVIDIA NVENC encoder, is that these Apple NVIDIA ones are running off of the GPU of your system, and then the X264 is the CPU encoder. So if you use X264, it's going to use more of your CPU resources. And if you use the Apple hardware encoder or the NVIDIA NVENC encoder, it's going to be using your GPU. So you can look up the details about like which performs better and the quality. That's all available online. Generally, though, I will just use the Apple hardware or the NVIDIA encoder over the X264 encoder. That said, usually I'm using computers that have pretty good graphics cards. So it makes sense, especially if you need that CPU resources for other processes on your computer. Okay, another very important setting for both streaming and recording is the bitrate. So if you are recording streaming games, then this can easily need to be set at 6,000, 10,000 kilobits per second or more in order for it to look good. Since when you have a game, it's going to have a lot of movement around the screen, of course, especially 3D games like Fortnite, what have you. And that's also going to apply for streaming. So generally, I think I would have this be more like 6,000. if I was going to stream online. But one important thing you have to keep in mind is that although your computer might be able to output 6,000 kilobits per second, does your internet speed also support that? So there are many sites you can use online in order to test your upload bandwidth. So your upload bandwidth, in order for the stream to be consistent, needs to be better than your bitrate. Now, once again, these days, internet speeds are generally pretty high, so it probably won't be a problem. But if you do see a lot of choppiness on your stream when you go to test, that could be one of the potential problems. Okay, one more thing about the recording settings that you might notice is that when you're on the recording tab here, the audio tracks are not a radio button where you can only select one of. They are actually check boxes. So you can check audio track 1 and 2 and 3 at the same time, which will mean that you're actually outputting 3 audio tracks to the recorded video file at the same time. Now, by default, all of your audio channels go to audio track 1, so we would need to set that up so that when you're actually recording your video file, your tracks will be separate and they can be edited individually, which is helpful because your audio is not mixed. Maybe you want to raise your spoken audio and lower the audio of your recorded game in the background, your desktop audio. However, while you're streaming, you can see that you can only select one audio track. So that means your audio all has to be combined when it goes onto the internet for your live stream audience to view and enjoy. So if you do want to set up 2 audio tracks, then let's start by just checking audio track 1 and 2, and let's hit OK. And then if we go down here to the audio mixer, we can click on the drop down and go to Advanced Audio Properties. Then let's go down here to the audio mixer, click on the drop down for one of these devices, and then choose Advanced Audio Properties. And this window will pop up. So let's expand this a little bit. And you can see that desktop audio is going to all audio tracks, and mic auxiliary audio is going to all audio tracks as well. So one way I would have this set up would actually be to have both of them go to track 1, and then track 1 will be the streaming track. So we have that combined audio there. And then I'll take desktop audio and uncheck that for 2, leave it checked for 3, uncheck 4, 5, 6. And then for mic, I'll uncheck 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this means that the mic is going to output 1 for streaming and 2 for recorded audio. And then desktop audio is going to 1 and 3. So when we have our recorded file, we want to use tracks 2 and 3. So let's close that and go back to the OBS preferences. Go to output, recording, and we're going to check audio tracks 2 and 3. So 2 is microphone, 3 is desktop audio. And now for the recorded video file, they're going to be split so that they can be separate and it's easier to edit them. So OBS also supports key bindings. So if we go back up to OBS preferences, there's this Hotkeys tab, and this is where you can set hotkeys to whatever you want on your computer. Generally, I don't use a lot of these, though there's lots of options, as you can see. But what I do find pretty helpful is to take start recording and stop recording and to bind them to the same key combination. So if you press on the empty box, then you press all 3 or 2 of the keys that you want to use to start recording. So for instance, if I was Command Shift R, I could set that there and then go down here, Command Shift R. And now on Mac, I would just be using Command Shift R to start and stop the recording. So if I press OK there, Command Shift R, you can see stop recording, Command Shift R, stop recording. So I find that can be a pretty handy key binding, especially if you're only working on one monitor and you don't want to have the OBS window pop up while you're recording. You can just tell it to start and stop in the background when it's minimized. Okay, next let's talk about file output locations. So once again, preferences. Where you set your output location is on the output tab, recording. So that's this recorded path here. It'll look different if you're on Windows, of course, but you can just hit the browse and then choose a location on your computer. Here you can see all of the videos I've been recording as of late, and you'll see that by default it's dated and then it has a hours, minutes, seconds, time of the day. If you want to change that so it's more recognizable, then we'll go back to our advanced settings, and here's where you'll see the file name formatting. So if you hover over the box with the cursor, you can see all the abbreviations you can use if you want to add extra information to the timestamp or you want to change it to something else. You can also just type in pure text. So for instance, maybe you're recording a series of videos, so you could say tutorial, and then that will be added to the end of all of your videos. Or of course you could go to the far left and add it to the beginning. So if I did this, all the files would be called tutorial, and then the year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds. So you could just customize that to whatever you want. So if you look down here a little bit below, there's also this checkbox to automatically remux to MP4. So if you are recording an MKV and you need your final video before you edit it to be in MP4 format, this can be a helpful checkbox. So I don't need that anymore since I'm just using DaVinci Resolve, but maybe some video editors still require MP4 and don't support MKV. So you can use that option, which will take your video file when you're done recording it and instantly convert it to an MP4 file. You can also do that manually, by the way. So if you go up to File, Remux Recordings, you can navigate on your computer to find the original OBS recording, if that's an MKV or another format, and then you can convert it here to a different type, like MP4 or .mov. It also does this really fast, so that is one way that you can get it in MP4 format in the end, but you can have the stability of the MKV format in case something goes wrong during your recordings, like a power outage. So just be aware of that. But once again, if you use DaVinci Resolve like I do, MKV is supported now, so it's not as needed as before. So I believe I briefly mentioned this, but another thing to be aware of is that you can record and stream at the same time. So if you have Twitch or YouTube set up and you want to start sending your video information to that output channel, then you would hit the start streaming button. But you can also have start recording going at the same time. So you would just start both of these at the same time, and then it'll be recording to a video file, but it will also be sending the information to that online service. So this can be a good option if you are later going to be doing a edit, let's say for a YouTube video, then you can do start recording, but at the same time, you can have that same information going to the live stream. Of course, worth noting, it's going to be more demanding on your computer, of course, if you're doing both at the same time. But I do think when possible, even if you're live streaming, it's always good to have a copy of your video saved to your computer in case you need it for any other purposes, like doing a highlight clip, for instance. So if you're going to be streaming, you're going to want to do a test of the service before you go ahead and go live. So here you can see I've just connected to my YouTube account. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here. YouTube chat pops up here. I'm just going to move that to the side. Okay, so before we can start streaming, we have to set up the broadcast. So I'm going to choose Manage Broadcast here. I'm going to make it private because we're just testing. And then I'll just say no to this. And we'll create the broadcast and start streaming. So the main thing here is that it's private so that you can test before you do a real broadcast. So let's create that. Okay, it's connecting to the service. And now there's going to be extra debug information down here at the bottom. So one thing to note is going to be your streaming bitrate here. We want this to be green over here, showing that we have a good connection. And then this is the amount of data that's going to the output. If it turns yellow and red like it just did there, you may have a problem. So if I move around a window, you'll see that the bitrate shoots way up because there's a bunch of movement around the screen. So the Apple hardware encoder, I guess, is automatically increasing the bitrate up to the maximum to accommodate for that. So if you see this green icon go yellow or red, it may mean that temporarily at least you're having a bit of a choppy connection to the server and it may start lagging on the back end. So other things to keep in mind is that your CPU usage is not too high overall, that your computer is actually able to handle the recording of the stream and also handling any games or whatever you have running in the background at the same time. And obviously that can mean you need a pretty decent computer in order to run all of that. So one thing to note is the FPS. So if this stays consistent, then you're good. But if it's dropping all the time, then it's going to mean that it is recording choppy footage. Of course, not a good thing. Dropped frames over here on the left. So this may go up kind of hand in hand if you have like that choppy connection icon. If this drops to red a bunch, you may be getting some dropped frames because the connection to the server is not as good as it should be. You want this to be as low as possible. If you have dropped frames, that means that frames of information are not going to be shown on the live stream backend. Key moments might be missed. So if you've confirmed that your stream's going good and you can check your backend video, you might have to refresh the page to see it and make sure that in the preview window that it's playing good there as well. Then you can stop your test stream, set it up for a public broadcast, and then go live, of course. So one last thing I want to point out, if you've been watching this whole video to the end, and if so, thanks for doing that, is that you can have videos loop. So this video clip in the background, obviously it's been going on and on this whole time. So if you have a video source loaded into your sources, you can double click on that and just check this loop box right here. So that can be really useful if you're setting up some kind of AFK background. Usually those kind of clips would loop. So that's how you do that. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much all of the basics for getting set up and running within OBS. So I've been Chris. I hope all of you have found this crash course to be helpful. Thank you for watching to the end. Hopefully I will see all of you in my future video content.